Welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
It's time for another episode of the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com, and I'm recording this on Tuesday, August 13th, 2024, and our guest is the esteemed Jim Shaw, Forum columnist and a longtime television newsman and broadcaster in the Fargo-Moorhead area. And, as I told Jim before I hit the red record button, he is the father of a college basketball coach, and I did not know, sadly for me, it's probably what a terrible reporter I am, I did not know that his son was involved in the basketball coaching world. So, Jim Shaw, welcome to the program, and I hold you in even higher regard than I did before I knew your son was a college basketball coach.
Oh,
and that's really
you're killing me with kindness here.
That's really hard to hold you in higher esteem.
When you called me esteemed, that was as far as you needed to go, and that was too far. But I love talking about my son, and I'm so happy for him and so proud of him. And I had, when he was at North Dakota State College of Science, I would tell other people at the forum how the team is doing, but I had not had you on that email link. But yeah, he's all about sports. He's all about basketball, and thank God he's doing what he loves to do, because he really wasn't meant to do much of anything else.
Well, wait a second. That doesn't.
I mean, he's had to try to offset his lack of coaching income other jobs, and he never really was enthusiastic about any of them.
Oh, okay.
But he's so into coaching and so into this, and I'm so happy.
And I apologize. His name is, I forgot.
Brad Shaw. And
he the reason we're talking about this is I had a tidbit in my little sports notes column last week about him getting a job.
He is the head coach at Fort Hays Tech Northwest in Goodland, Kansas.
Okay.
He had previously, the last 4 seasons, been an assistant at the North Dakota State College of Science, and before that he was at Dickinson, and before that he was in Florida, and before that he was in Ohio, and before that he was a student manager at Nebraska under Tim Walz. So he's paid his dues.
He's done the vagabond bit that all college coaches have to do if they want to get someplace.
Right.
Yeah, good. He's a Fargo South graduate.
Fargo South grad, played on the Fargo South basketball team, was all conference at the time, and he played in the state tournament, and so, as I say,
I'm assuming he got all his athletic ability from his mother.
I don't know if you know this about me. I was a good athlete in my day. I was on the high school football team that played in the state championship game in Massachusetts, and I was the Suburban League champion in Massachusetts in the 100-yard dash and the long jump.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, good for you.
I was a track guy. And then post-school, I was a self-taught tennis player, and I used to play a lot of tennis around here and won lots of awards.
Oh, good for you.
So,
I did. I learned. See, when you ask questions,
I realize,
you learn new things.
I realize I don't look like a guy with any athletic skills, and I know we're not getting to what you want to do. But
none of us at our age do look like we can do anything, Jim.
Can I throw this in?
Yes.
So last summer, we had my high school reunion in the Boston area, and I said, hi, because they had me emceeing, for goodness knows why, but they had me emceeing, and I said, hi, I'm Jim Shaw, and years ago, when I was a senior, I was the captain of the track team, and as you can tell, I have not changed a bit. And that line went over way too well. I mean, they were laughing in hysterics. It's like, okay, I was hoping for a little snicker, a little chuckle, but they were laughing so loudly that I should have done a do-over on that one, because they clearly indicated I do not look like I could even walk 100 yards, let alone run it.
Don't sell yourself short. You're a tremendous slouch. You look just fine. That's a line from Caddyshack, by the way, if you didn't know that.
And we like Caddyshack.
Yes, we do. Let's get to what we want to get to.
Sure.
And that is, you and I like to talk about politics when we get together. And you had a good column last week that I texted you about and complimented you about Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who is now the running mate for Democratic presidential candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris. And I've been on the Walz bandwagon for some time, and I didn't know that he was going to be picked as the VP, but I thought he would have been a good choice. Others didn't believe that or don't believe that. But you and I kind of see things the same way when it comes to Tim Walz. Explain to me why you feel that way and why you think that Tim Walz was a good choice for Kamala Harris.
I think he has the best people skills if you look at the other ones. He's a great speaker. He's so likable. He's friendly. He's clever. He's got a great resume with everything that he has done. And you can tell he works so well with Kamala. They really have great chemistry. The only reasons not to pick him, and these were legitimate reasons, were geography. Because Minnesota, which for a while was looking like it was in play when Biden was still running, but Minnesota really is not a swing state. And so you got to think when you're picking a running mate, well, who's going to help me win the most? And Walz did not fit that compared to Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania and Mark Kelly from Arizona. But I just think Walz, with his breath of fresh air and his down-to-earth common sense and the way he comes off, I think he blows the others away. And people are rallying around him. It's amazing how just that one comment he said about the mega camp being weird, how that just skyrocketed him into contention. And you got to pick a running mate that you feel comfortable with and you really like, and it seems like these two really like each other. So it's turning out to be an excellent pick, and people are really liking Tim Walz.
The weird thing, my opinion, and I agree that with the premise of it, that when you look at some of these MAGA people, you're just like, what are you talking about? What? And you and I have said this for 8 years. It's like, what? What the hell are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense to any reasonable, common sense thinking person. But I think that what Walz did was that he went on the offense against MAGA. And I don't know that a lot of Democrats have gone on offense against them since about 2015 or 2016. It always seems, and I said this to former Senator Heidi Heitkamp last week, it just always seems like Democrats have been playing defense since 2015, 2016, that they're always trying to defend themselves, and they're afraid to look at Donald Trump and go, my God, you're just a strange dude. Because they were afraid of the pushback, and they're afraid of the maggots, if you will.
Right. Well,
they're afraid of the online comments.
Remember Michelle Obama's famous comment, when they go low, we go high?
Yes.
Well, that backfired.
Yes, it did.
You got to hit them as hard as they're hitting you.
Yes. And I think when Walz brought that up and people went, yeah, they are weird, it just sort of opened up the door for people to say, yeah, yes, they are. They're strange. They're talking about getting electrocuted by electric boats and sharks attack. I mean, what was that when Trump was talking? It is weird.
And the late, great Hannibal Lecter. What
yes.
is, I mean, that's
yeah. I mean, there's a list of 500 things just in the last 6 months that he said, that Trump has said, and other MAGAs have said as well. You can look in North Dakota and look at Nico Rios,
right,
and go, wow, this dude's weird. This is some strange crap here.
Well, there's been strange stuff just in the last couple of days. Trump, of course, this is what he wants, is claiming that Joe Biden is going to come back and try to seek the nomination. And then I'm assuming you saw this one. He claimed that the rally in Detroit, where there were 15,000 people to greet Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, was all fake. It was all AI.
Yes.
I mean, this is way off the deep end. And this is who could be elected president.
Right. And Walz allowed Democrats to say that we're going to be the ones attacking, that we're going to be pushing forward and not backpedaling, trying to just fend off the Republicans. We're going to be the aggressors in this campaign and take it to them. I will say this. I'm a Minnesota resident, have been for most of the last 58 years. There was a time when I did live in Fargo when my wife and I were dating. But mostly I've been a Minnesota guy, so I've followed Minnesota politics closely. I've talked to Tim Walz multiple times, as you have, I'm sure. We've met him. He's what you see on TV.
Right.
But I will say this, Jim, and I'll get your thoughts on this, is the way in which he's moved seamlessly into this role as sort of the attack dog and the vice presidential candidate, and the way that he went from governor of a fairly small state on the nation stage in Minnesota to the biggest stage, and just did it like boom, and has this energy and this positivity and this joy, which is a word we can talk about as well.
He does.
Because I think it's super important to what we're trying to do here in November. That surprised me a little bit. I've been around the guy just a little bit. I've seen him speak before in person, and he's always been good. I didn't know he was this good.
I didn't either. And I remember on the day where they brought him out and he had his first rally, he had this one line that was just so indicative of how impressive he is and what he's going to be like on the campaign trail. If you remember this, first of all, he is going to refute Donald Trump's lies. And one of them he said was, contrary to what Donald Trump said, crime was up when Donald Trump was president. And that doesn't even count Trump's crimes. That was a great line.
That was pretty good. Yep, that was pretty good.
You know, what's interesting is that, if you think Minnesota, if you thought a Minnesota politician was going to be on the national stage, before he left office, I would have said Al Franken, and after Al Franken left office, I would have said Amy Klobuchar. I never saw Tim Walz coming, but he just crept up the radar, and I'm told he had a very strong interview with Kamala Harris.
I'll pat myself on the back here, but I talked to what I would deem a prominent Minnesota Democrat several months ago, and actually wrote a column based on that conversation, not giving away my sources because this person didn't want to be named. But that person said, Tim Walz is setting himself up to run for president in 2028. You watch. And I wrote the column, saying that. It got a little play, got some couple, Twin Cities Politico types kind of going, we'll see. But then as things went on, it became clear that in his position as the National Democratic Governors Association, as the head of that, it was clear that he was beginning to make more national speeches and kind of get his name out there. So I think somewhere in his head, Tim Walz had his eye on the future and wondering, okay, if Trump wins and it has to be done after 4 years, or if Biden wins and it has to be done after 4 more years, then how can I position myself to be that next guy, at least in the conversation? So that part of it where it didn't, I knew he wanted something else.
Right.
I just didn't see this vice presidential thing coming as quickly as it did. And then for him to just absolutely be Ted Williams at the plate and knocking the ball around the ballpark,
he's crushing
everybody
it.
loving him,
He's crushing it. And if you compare the running mates, and mind you, of course, it basically comes down to the top of the ticket.
Yes.
But Walz helps. Walz brings in more voters for Kamala Harris. I don't see J.D. Vance bringing in any more voters for Trump. He might even be hurting him, but he is not giving any kind of a bump to the Trump campaign. So Walz right now is outshining Vance, and I look forward to their debate because that one's going to be interesting.
Well, and I think it's standard. The standard belief is that when Trump selected Vance, number one, there's been a couple stories out there nationally that said Trump actually wanted to pick Doug Burgum.
Right.
That he thought Doug Burgum was the best choice, and his sons.
Exactly.
what's their names? Dumbo and Idiot.
Don Jr. and Eric.
Sure, Dumbo and Idiot. Talked him out of it and said, "What? No, Doug Burgum. He's a piece of, white toast. He's a saltine cracker. You don't want Doug Burgum. You want J.D. Vance because he's the next era of MAGA. He's young. He's tied into the tech bros out in Silicon Valley. He's the guy." And so Trump went with Vance, and it almost immediately was a mistake, or at least it's perceived as a mistake.
Right.
Because he brings nothing. There's no added value, right? You talked earlier about Josh Shapiro, bringing in possibly Pennsylvania and guaranteeing Pennsylvania as much as you can guarantee a state.
Which is huge.
Which is huge, right? Which is the keystone state, literally and figuratively. And talk about bringing in Mark Kelly, who I don't think was ever dynamic enough or energetic enough. Plus, his seat would have had to come up and blah, blah, blah. But he would have brought Arizona and possibly could have helped her win Arizona, which might be key as well. But J.D. Vance does none of that. Ohio's going to go Republican. He's not an energetic, smart, funny, positive guy like Tim Walz. He's just a junior Donald Trump, not Donald Trump Jr., a junior Donald Trump, except not as charismatic, and I don't think as bright or as swift on his feet as even Donald Trump or Tim Walz or Kamala Harris. He's just sort of almost a drag on the ticket.
He is. I mean, people forget he's only been in the Senate for a year and a half, and before that, no elective office. So this is quite a jump for him to go on the national stage. In hindsight, Trump should have picked Burgum. Burgum would have been kind of a no harm, no foul guy. You don't want your running mate hurting you, and you don't want your running mate getting attention for all the wrong reasons. You just want him to be quietly supporting the top of the ticket. And Burgum had shown in his audition for the vice presidency that he was very, very good at that. I mean, he sold his soul, but he was very good at bragging up Donald Trump for all the wrong reasons.
Right. But I think J.D. Vance is also willing to do that because he, of course, once famously called Donald Trump, he could be America's Hitler. But Vance just isn't good enough on his feet.
Right.
I mean, he's going to suck the toes and lick the boots. He's just not very good at it.
Right. But Burgum never said anything as foolish as criticizing women for not having children.
No, that's correct.
And that correct. Will come back to bite Vance in the butt.
Yes. Yep. I agree. So, what could come back to bite Tim Walz in the butt? If we're talking about things biting vice presidential candidates in the butt.
They're trying with his military record. You would think 24 years in the Guard would give him absolute credentials with people who are strong defense, but they're going after him because he quit or he retired 2 months before his unit was deployed overseas. I don't even know if he would have known that, but they're trying to make a big deal out of that. I think the bigger thing they'll go after him for, which they're starting already, in their view, is his slow reaction to the riots in Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd. I think it took almost 3 days for him to call in the National Guard. However, Walz has a perfect rebuttal to that because he has tape of Donald Trump praising him for his response to the riots
great job
in Minneapolis.
Yep.
But I think those and they'll also say that he's too liberal. He's way too liberal. And he has certainly evolved. When he was representing a rural Minnesota district in Congress, he was more of a moderate. And then when he became governor, he definitely became more liberal. And so they will go after him for some of his liberal policies. But I'm not sure any of them stick. There was some argument when Harris was picking or looking at who she was going to pick that maybe she should go for Shapiro, beyond the fact that he would bring in Pennsylvania, but because Shapiro is more moderate, and that would appeal more to undecided voters. But in this case, Walz has been just so strong on the stump that I don't think that makes any difference. I think it's Walz's personality that's going to offset any of these charges against him to bring him down.
The other interesting thing is that Republicans are spending so much time and so much energy and so much effort on the vice president.
Right.
I mean, and I've heard others way smarter than myself say this. But
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm just going to see this just for comparison's sake. Can you tell me who Hillary Clinton's VP pick was in 2016? Just for comparison.
Tim Kaine.
You got it. Okay. Then no, it was good. Most people.
Correct.
Most people don't remember. Even during the campaign, Tim Kaine was invisible.
Yes.
He did nothing,
which was probably part of the problem.
Yes, it was. It was not a good pick.
Yeah.
But just to back up your point, and I'm sorry for interrupting. Nobody was going after Tim Kaine. They are going after Tim Walz because they recognize how strong Walz is, and Tim Kaine really was not a factor.
Others way smarter than myself, though, are saying every minute and every dollar you spend against the vice president, you're not spending or consuming against the presidential candidate, who is Kamala Harris. And you correctly said earlier, it's really about the top of the ticket. It's about, of course it is, Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Even Donald Trump said this correctly, which is one of the few things that he was honest and correct about, is he said, really, does the vice presidential candidate really matter in this? I mean, in his case, he was correct,
but you know why he said that is because Vance was doing so poorly.
So terrible, yes.
He was trying to poo-poo the significance of Vance's offensive comments.
The Democrats are going after Vance in more of a, oh, by the way, this guy's terrible. The couch joke and all that. It's nothing. Nobody's spending all day, every day going after J.D. Vance and making jokes. The Republicans are spending a lot of capital going after Tim Walz when he's not running for president. He is on the ticket.
Right.
Kamala Harris is the person people are voting for, and who is also energizing big crowds in Las Vegas, Detroit, Philadelphia, and they're going all over the country. They're hitting every swing state multiple times the next several weeks. And so my point is that Walz is, not only is he taking the flack, not only is he giving the flack, he's also, even though vice presidential candidates, running mates, are not supposed to take away from the presidential candidate, that's a major boo-boo. They're not supposed to outshine them, but he's taking all the attention, and so Kamala Harris is not getting attacked nearly as much right now as Tim Walz is.
Right. And I've not seen that before. I was trying to think back to all the other presidential races, and the only thing I can think of a little bit was 1988, Dan Quayle. He got bombarded. They still won, but he got bombarded. And, of course, the best line ever in a debate when Lloyd Bentsen said to Dan Quayle, "You're no John Kennedy." But
I knew John Kennedy, sir. And I knew John Kennedy, and you, sir, are no John Kennedy.
Yeah. And Bentsen, because Quayle had throughout the campaign compared himself to John F. Kennedy, and Bentsen was waiting for him to bring it up at the debate, and then he pounced in it. Again, the best line ever in a debate.
I would say Sarah Palin came close to taking, when John McCain selected her in 2008.
Yep.
She took a lot of the spotlight and a lot of the fire from the left, because John McCain was the war hero, generally likable. You could not like his politics, but I think that he was an actual, real, true American. Whether you disagree with his politics or not, that's what politics are. But when he added Sarah Palin to the ticket to try to grab that far right flank and get people energized, I think Democrats spent an awful lot of time.
That's true.
Volleying at her rather than McCain.
She started off great, and then the more people got to know her, the more that became a burden on the McCain campaign instead of a help.
Yep. So you and I were talking off the air about, again, I follow Minnesota politics probably way too closely, but Republicans in Minnesota, and this includes rank and file, people you'll see in the 50 Lakes bar up in Crow Wing County, they are absolutely beside themselves about the Feeding Our Future scandal in Minnesota, where there was a nonprofit set up that was supposed to get government money through the PPP, and then distribute it out to impoverished children in Minnesota and feed them. So Feed Our Future. The group that put that together basically defrauded the government and this nonprofit out of tens of millions of dollars. Republicans in Minnesota think that's Tim Walz's Achilles heel. that it was his state government in charge, that nobody was fired. I heard it again this weekend. Nobody was fired. Nobody was accountable. And they think that's the biggest thing in the world. They're obsessed with it in Minnesota. The Republican Party in Minnesota is obsessed with the Feeding Our Future scandal. What I told somebody this weekend when they brought it up to me was, I just don't see it being something that gains any traction because I never hear it from anybody around here. It's a Twin Cities-centric thing, and all the conservative bloggers and the right-wingers and the Center for the American Experiment and all those wackos are all over it. But up here in the hinterlands, I just don't ever hear much about it. Once in a while, but not very much. Is that scandal going to be something that the Republicans can focus on, Jim? And
if they do, it's not going anywhere. That's not. I had never heard of it, and I cover politics pretty closely. I'd never heard of it till a couple of weeks ago when his name was starting to be bandied about. And I think it's too inside baseball, and I think it's too complex. I think whenever you go after somebody, you got to really simplify the issue. So if you're Donald Trump, the border, too many migrants coming across here, the cost of gasoline or the cost
Joe
of
Biden
eggs.
is too old.
Yeah.
Joe Biden old.
Joe Biden too old. Very simple. Or again, going back to Walz, the riots after George Floyd was murdered. These are very simple concepts that you can exploit. But when you go into something like that people don't understand it, and it doesn't connect with them, because the cost of living connects with everybody. The border connects with a lot of people. The riots connect, although a lot of people go beyond the riots. They look at the root cause of racism and black band.
But the riots provide great video. As an old TV guy, they provide a great visual that the burning buildings downtown Minneapolis.
I mean, if I'm the Trump campaign, I'm going to run that video all over and over and over again and say, where was Tim Walz?
And people should talk about it. We're talking about selecting a president and a vice president. As a Democrat, I have no problem with people asking Tim Walz, what did you do and why did you do it? That's fine. That's what we're supposed to do, right?
Right.
Any party.
Right. But also another part of that, as you may remember, is beyond the fact that Donald Trump called to praise Tim Walz, Donald Trump has lied and said he's the one who called in the troops and he did it.
Correct.
So if he's bragging about calling in the troops, that plays into the hands of Harris and Walz because that says, well, it was the right thing to do. And guess who did it? Your opponents.
Yes. Yep. And so it's going to get nasty. It's going to get ugly because all presidential campaigns do, and especially this one, because I think this is it for MAGA and Donald Trump. If he loses in November, he's done. The MAGA movement will continue, but without him, I don't know what it is. There's no charismatic guy that people are going to rally around like a cult leader waiting in the wings.
Right.
And so the Republicans, knowing that, are going to go all in. Pardon my French, balls to the wall to try to win this election at any cost. Any cost.
Well, my concern is they are working on trying to put the fix in some of these swing states.
That's
like
why
Georgia,
I was saying any cost.
Where if you get the most votes, you may not get certified as the winner because they're packing these local county election boards with MAGA types who will say, okay, this person got the most votes. I don't care. I'm not certifying it.
Right. Yep. They're trying to
I wouldn't be
stack the deck.
surprised if they've learned a lot from 4 years ago where they tried very hard to overturn an election, and now they've learned what can be effective and what's not. They're a lot smarter. 4 years ago, they were learning as they went. So I'm very worried about how this election plays out, assuming Harris would win. And right now, it's probably a 50-50 election.
It's a toss-up, but all the momentum is on Kamala Harris's side as we speak. And
it is.
And the one thing I saw the other day from a credible news source is that the interesting thing is that Donald Trump's numbers nationally haven't moved. They're not going down. They're just staying where they are. But the growth was for Kamala Harris because Joe Biden had fallen behind in the polls so badly in so many swing states and nationally that Trump is just staying right there at 43.9% or whatever, which you could take one of two ways. It's like, oh my God, he's not dropping. Or you could say, well, that's a ceiling. So we'll see how that plays out. But the trend right now is certainly that Kamala Harris is on the rise, and different groups of people are very excited. Young people, black people seem to have, black voters have seemed to consolidated behind Kamala Harris, according to the polls I've seen. Hispanic numbers, voters of Hispanic heritage have risen in the polls.
Yeah, they're good, but not
behind.
great for her.
Yep, they're okay, but not fantastic. Right. Georgia, speaking of Georgia, has now been declared a toss-up state by some of the pollsters and the aggregators. Florida, I just saw, was closer than it should be for Republicans. Kamala Harris is within 5 points in Florida at this point.
Okay.
I have been told by, again, people far smarter than myself. In fact, Jim Clyburn has said publicly he thinks that Florida and Ohio will end up being toss-up states.
Well, that's what I say. Ohio is going in that direction. I mean, it was only 10 years ago that Florida and Ohio were swing states. Florida, you wouldn't think so, but there's one issue in Florida that will definitely help Harris and Walz, and that is they're voting on abortion rights. So
and same thing in Arizona, too. In Arizona, they're also voting on abortion rights in Arizona.
Again, that helps the Democratic candidates.
Yep.
That'll bring them to the polls. I still think Florida's a heavy lift, as is Ohio, and I think North Carolina is fool's gold. But I think
North Carolina's another one that is the latest polls have shown it tied.
I think Georgia and Arizona and Nevada are now in play, whereas when Biden was running, they were lost.
Yes, correct.
As well as other states you wouldn't think so, like New Hampshire and Virginia.
North Carolina voted for Obama, I think.
One of the two times by one. But I think Biden lost by like 1.5% last time. They always put a lot of money in, and they always get close, but just not close enough.
Yep.
But on the other hand, North Carolina has a very competitive governor's race, and the Republican candidate is crazy, and he's a Holocaust denier,
yes.
and he's mega crowd.
The lieutenant governor is elected, I think, separately from the governor in North Carolina, so you can have a Democratic governor, in which they do with Roy Cooper, but a Republican lieutenant governor, which is different than many states, maybe most states.
Right. Well, this is way ahead of ourselves, but you could have that in Minnesota if Walz wins, and there's one special election in the Minnesota Senate.
Right.
And the Senate, as I understand it, the majority leader there will become lieutenant governor.
Yes.
So theoretically,
that happened not too long ago.
Wasn't Fischbach? She was lieutenant governor under a Democrat.
Under Mark Dayton.
It's a crazy system, but it could happen.
Yeah. Okay. Last question, because I got to run. Doug Burgum. If things continue the way they appear to be going, in terms of Trump losing his mind and perhaps falling behind in some swing states, and maybe Republicans are worried right now. If you read the stuff that's out there, smart Republicans are like, things are not trending the right direction right now, and Donald Trump is not handling this well. If we continue down that path past Labor Day, and perhaps, and I'm getting way ahead of ourselves again, perhaps looks like Kamala Harris is going to be elected, or people are confident she might be elected. What does Doug Burgum do? Is he in it till the bitter end?
Oh, I think so.
Okay,
I think so. And remember, it looked like Hillary Clinton was going to win easily. Mm-hmm. So we're only in the middle of August. Something could change. I mean, there's worry that Harris is peaking too soon. So I wouldn't be too overconfident in the Harris camp. Who knows who could have foreseen where we got to at this point in the campaign?
Correct.
Something else could happen. I mean, you're not going to have James Comey coming up and torpedoing a candidate, but something else could happen.
But it might. You never know.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah. But of course he's in. He's gonna. This is his guy. You never know how the vote's going to go, and if Trump wins, obviously big things are ahead for Burgum.
Yep.
But my guess is if Trump loses, Burgum probably runs for president in 2028. Don't you think?
You think you would? I don't know.
I think he would. Whereas if Trump wins And assuming Trump recognizes that the Constitution says he's done in 4 years, which I don't think he would,
Nope.
then J.D. Vance would be your guy. But yeah, no, Doug Burgum will stay in because this is where he's put all his money. This is where he put all his cards. And Doug has got to do what's best for Doug, and what's best for Doug is Donald Trump winning and making Doug Burgum a national figure.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Good stuff as always.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
You bet. Jim Shaw, Forum columnist and a longtime newsman here in the Fargo-Moorhead area. This has been the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. Thanks for listening. Buy a subscription so we can continue to do these things with our guys like Jim Shaw and Joel Heitkamp and Tasha Carvel and Heidi Heitkamp and Clay Jenkinson. Buy a subscription. There's always a deal at Inforum.com, so check that out. And please read Jim's column and read my column because that makes us look good to the bosses. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to Inforum.com and search Mike McFeely